Hi friends, it's Jessica from melifecoach.com. That's melifecoach.com. It used to be my Enneagram life coach, but a lot of people struggle with spelling Enneagram, understandably. So it's me because that stands for my Enneagram lifecoach.com. Okay, so melifecoach.com. Today, I haven't made that many videos yet for this channel, so what we're doing right now is we're just doing some very basic overviews on what Enneagram is, what it's used for. And I think yesterday I posted a video of the head types, which are 3 of the personality types that the Enneagram covers. Enneagram is a typology of human behavior that breaks people up into 9 different ways of being human, we'll call them. They're all valid. None of them is, quote, better or worse than the other. Each of us has one dominant one that we come from that's been our one since birth and will be the one all the way for the rest of our lives. But part of Enneagram work is learning how to expand out of that one that you are born into so that you can, because the one that you're born into, it has skills, but it also has weaknesses. It has blind spots. So you have great gifts, whatever number you were born into, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You have a lot of skills and gifts to bring to the world. How I would word it is, you are a reflection of the divine. You are an image bearer of God. And the way you bring your divine gifts to the world is primarily through the strengths of your type. However, you are bigger than your type, meaning whatever type you were born into, those are just patterns, they're habits, they're stories that you have felt like were real stories, but they're not actually objective reality, we will say. And so Enneagram work is learning what those stories are and what other stories are, what other stories people are living into, but also what other stories you could live into. Because sometimes your number is helpful and the skills in your number are helpful for whatever is going on in your life currently, but sometimes it's helpful to shift into another type. Enneagram is a dynamic system, meaning, let's say you are a type 2. You don't always have to show up like a 2. You can show up like an 8, or you can show up like a 3, or you can show up like a 4. And Enneagram has very specific ways, at least early on, that you can learn how to go to those numbers. So yesterday, we talked about types 5, 6, and 7, which are head types, which are people who approach the world through the lens of a cerebral processing, logic, logistics, planning, gathering information, trying to map a way forward that makes sense. It's kind of like neck up. When we are in our headspace, we're not necessarily in our hearts or our emotions, and we're not necessarily in our body or what's called the gut center in Enneagram. Headspace is more like calculating equations, making sense of things, figuring things out, that type of thing lives in the head space. But today we're going to talk about the heart space. So just as 3 of the types lead with a head space knowledge, 3 of the types lead with a heart space knowledge. So when we shift into the heart types, these are numbers 2, 3, and 4. Sometimes the heart types are called image types, and that's because the fundamental primary problem, we will say, that a heart type experiences in life is the question of how do I make myself lovable, and how do I deepen connections with others and maintain my lovability. What heart types have forgotten is that they are already made in the image of the divine. They are fully lovable. They can never be more lovable than they are in this moment, and they could never be less lovable than they are in this moment. Being lovable is a gift from the divine. And sometimes I say to my clients on coaching calls, I will say to them, look, we all know this. We all know that people have value. I mean, if you question it, one thing I say to people is go down to the closest hospital and go to the newborn ward. I don't think you can really do this anymore, but you see all these newborn babies. Which one is not lovable? It's a bad question, right? It doesn't even make sense. Of course they're all lovable. Who in the world would say, oh, that one's lovable, but these two are not? That one, yeah, so. Okay, that's not how humans work, but the heart types have the experience that somehow their lovability is being jeopardized or could be jeopardized. So their subconscious response to that is to create an image of themselves that is presented to the world that will finally make them lovable. Now, these people some of them can be really good with emotional intelligence. Types 2, 3, and 4 are fairly good at, they're generally better than other types at empathy or at connection. They pay attention to people. They are, in some ways, I guess you could say they're just really people-centric because they are so concerned about their image. And their image is how other people are viewing them. So when we talked about head types yesterday, we talked about the head types are trying to figure things out, and whether it's math or science or literature or whatever, but they're like trying to understand the world. But notice there's not another human involved in that. It's kind of like it's like a something you do by yourself. When you're figuring things out, you do that by yourself. The image types, by definition, need somebody else whose eyes are on them that they're presenting this image to. So in that sense, you've already got a relational foundation with these types that is different from how the other 6 types do it. Okay, so each of the 3 heart types, 2, 3, and 4, have this conscious or not, like this underlying feeling that their lovability is on the line. So they're going to subconsciously create an image that makes them more lovable. And they each do that in their own ways. And I mentioned when we talked about head types that the people in the 5, 6, and 7 are the Enneagram head types, and their overall experience of the world is somewhat scary. They're what we call the fear types. That's why they're frantically trying to figure things out and gather information, because they don't inherently feel safe or certain about the world, and that makes things feel dicey for them. But when we're talking about the heart types today, fear and insecurity because of resources or survival, that's not necessarily what's on the hearts of our heart types. They are experiencing a sadness. Sadness is the underlying emotion, the underlying negative emotion that they will report feeling more consistently. So they still could have fear, because every human has fear, but they are more prone to sadness, and some of them would use the word shame. And of course, that shame, again, shame is a feeling that you feel in reference to another person. To feel shame means that you believe somebody else is looking at you and you feel ashamed of that. So the shame is rooted in this false belief that they are somehow not lovable, or that they need to be ashamed of who they are in their core. And again, just a reminder, who they are in their core is actually a divine image bearer. They're children of God, but they forget that, and that makes them feel insecure in their connections and their lovability. So what kind of image do we create? What are we talking about? Oh, and I should also say, if you're not a heart type, if you know yourself to not be an Enneagram 2, 3, or 4, this is still relevant, because any human, me, you, everybody, when we go into our heart space, we tap into at least one, if not 2 or all 3 of these ways of being when we're in our heart. So another way to look at it is, when humans go to their emotions, these are the types of ways that we show up. So you don't have to be a type 2, 3, or 4 to know what we're talking about today. And again, remember, one of the biggest goals of Enneagram work overall is to learn to embody all of the types in appropriate ways throughout your life. So sometimes it's beneficial to show up like a type 2, sometimes it's beneficial to show up like a 7, sometimes like a 1, etc. So if you don't know these spaces, what's maybe helpful for you to know is you are capable on some levels of tapping into these ways of being. But you probably already are. The question is where and how are you tapping into this? So, okay, heart types, type 2. The image, or let's say this, type 2 feels that people, that in order to be loved, you have to give something first. That love is a reciprocal experience. That for somebody to be loved by anyone, you have to help them or serve them or support them or somehow serve them in a way that you earn pretty much the love. So twos, the focus of their energy, and remember, personality is formed by what you focus on. That's it. It's that simple. Where your attention and energy goes, that's what makes your personality. So people who come from two space naturally are paying attention to people around them, especially important people, people that they deem important, whether that's a spouse or a movie star or the pastor or their boss or the cool girl or whatever. It's like they kind of hone in on important people, and then they will serve them. They will serve these people subconsciously. And what's really happening is they are kind of trying to earn love and affection from people. So each type we mentioned has what's called a vice or a sin. That sin here meaning missing the mark. Each type is somehow just missing the mark about how they're understanding the world, and that our personalities are formed around that sin or that way, that blind spot that we have. And so what happens in type 2 is they somehow have gotten the message that if you want to be loved, you can't be needy or clingy or even bring bad vibes. Like you want to be happy, cheerful, helpful, supportive, loving, yay, always happy. And that's the kind of person that people will love. Now, the thing is, you can't possibly be that all the time, right? That's not sustainable. That's not realistic. Humans are happy sometimes, and sometimes we're sad, and sometimes we have needs. But the two tries to create an image of themselves that does not have needs. And what that does for them is it sort of makes them like the special friend that everybody has that will meet everybody else's needs. But when the friends say, well, how can we, what do we do for you? Oh, no, stop. I don't need you to do that. Stop. So twos kind of put up an image like they don't want people helping them or meeting their needs. But what's really happening is the two has consciously or not suppressed her own needs. It's really, so what's happening is the two wants to appear to be the kind of person who doesn't need any help and who's not needy and who's not clingy and who's just giving and giving and giving, just a fountain of generosity. That's sort of how they want to present. But also, truth be told, they have a little bit of a feeling or a belief that the people who love them will know what they need, even without them telling them. So mind read, right? They expect people who love them to mind read what it is they need, and part of that's because they believe they are mind readers. Twos believe they know what every single person needs. And to an extent, they're not wrong. Like they're paying attention to people. They're paying really close attention to people. So in conversations, they're likely to bring up the things that they know you're interested in. And they're seductive in that way because I don't mean sexually seductive, although they could be, but that's not what I mean here. I mean, they know how to like lure you in, like, oh, how did you do at your championship game the other day? Oh, yeah, well, you look really good. You look really helpful. You look really beautiful. They're very, like, they gush with compliments. When they're kind of activated, it's like too many compliments. It's obvious that they're trying really hard to like gush, and sometimes I don't think they realize this, but it becomes obvious that they're like manufacturing like over niceness or something. It can feel strange to people who don't know what's going on. It can feel very strange. Like, why is this person acting like I'm like a superhero? I'm not. So But what's happening there is they are trying to present an image of somebody who is necessary, who is super lovable, who you want to have around, who's always positive, and they are trying to meet your needs so that you will then meet their needs. And of course, you can play this out. It becomes very problematic in their close relationships, because the truth of the matter is, no matter how much somebody loves you, they can't necessarily read your mind, or they can't read your mind. And so it ends up most of the time being more helpful to present your needs to somebody, to say, hey, this is what I need. In this relationship, this is what I need. That's really hard to do for a 2, for 2 reasons. Number one, I've already said, because they don't want to present themselves as somebody with needs. But the second reason is because they have spent their whole life not paying attention to themselves. Remember, their focus is on serving other people. They kind of don't even know their needs. It's really hard for a 2 to know what he wants. They're just not in the habit of doing that. It's almost like they've convinced themselves even that they don't have needs. But of course, then what happens is they end up getting very resentful and angry. And if you live with a 2, or if you know one up close, you know that happy-go-lucky, friendly image that they present in public, behind the scenes, that's not really how they are. And that's because they're very frustrated. And we all would be frustrated in that position, right? Because they don't put on their oxygen mask first before they put on the oxygen mask of others. Okay, so that's the 2 space. So the vice at 2 is pride. The pride is, I know what everybody needs. I don't have any needs, but I can help everybody, and I can somehow make myself indispensable. And here's the real kicker. I can make anybody like me. 2s generally believe that they can make anybody like them through that seduction, through that gushing, and through that friendliness. And so if that is the vice at 2, the virtue for each of the types, there's a virtue that counteracts the vice. The virtue at 2 is humility. It's for them to realize they are not, it's hard to say, because the 2 doesn't want to be rejected. It's not that they're not lovable, because of course they're lovable, but these things that they're doing to make themselves indispensable are not making them any more lovable. And if they had humility to recognize that they don't have to be everybody's best friend or favorite. They can be real interested in being somebody's favorite person, or your best friend, or your. They don't have to be the favorite. They don't have to be the best. They can just be a good friend, and that's good enough. So the humility of knowing that they actually are not so powerful. They can have a really inflated self-image that makes them think that they can lure anybody in and kind of woo anybody to take care of them. That's not true. So humility brings them back down to the rest of us and says, hey, listen, we do love you too. You don't have to, we love you already. You know, if you have friends and family who are 2s, you know this, like, they don't need to earn love. That's a story they're living in that is not helpful. We already love them. And yes, we appreciate their good deeds. 2s are usually really good at making you feel comfortable. So sometimes they're good cooks, or good homemakers, or they can be good with their hands. Like if it's like a carpenter maybe, or like they can build things, and they have a lot of wonderful gifts, and we love them regardless. That's the thing that they need to hear. Okay, so now let's move into type 3. Type 3 is in the heart space, but a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know that 3s are so focused on others, because 3s are very, very ambitious. 3s are the people who are focusing on goals and winning. 3s want to be their very best version of themselves, and their focus is on being like shining bright, and status is usually pretty important to a 3. 3s, the image that they are creating is one of success, because it seems to a 3 from the time they were young that people remember, they're looking for love people who are successful, or people love winners, or people love, and the opposite, a 3 is trying to avoid. A 3 feels like people do not like losers. Most threes will report, childhood experiences where they notice their parents or their caretakers or their grandparents or something, like paying more attention to, or maybe like gushing on them more when they won or when they got, straight A's or something. So the message they heard was, oh, in order to get love, I need to really perform and be the best of the best of the best. Otherwise, I won't be lovable. Now, again, that's not true, right? You're lovable because you're lovable, not because you're a winner. But it feels to a three like their lovability could be jeopardized if they lose. And so because of that, a three will present an image. Remember their image types. They can mask. Twos can mask. We just talked about twos. Twos will put on a happy mask. Threes are the chameleons of the Enneagram. Threes believe that they know how to impress people, and they will show up differently depending on the circumstance they are in and who they're trying to impress in that moment. So it's like, if a three is sitting at a table of people that they think are, I don't know, cool people, and the people all have a certain political view, the three will say that he also has that same political view. Now, he may or may not, but he's trying to present to himself as likable. And so he's masking, putting forth an image of something that he's really not, but that he thinks will earn, their love, or they'll like him more, or he'll fit in more if he presents like that. The vice at three is deceit. And deceit does not mean that they are liars, because that's usually what we think of when we think of the word deceit, although they could be. But anybody can lie. You don't have to be a three to lie. But what we mean here by deceit is more of a self-deceit. Because again, in a similar way to the two, the three has spent their whole life shape-shifting into what they believed people would want them to be, or who they believe people want them to be. And they've done that for so long that they've neglected themselves, and they actually don't even know who they are. So for a three, the challenge is to actually stop trying to please everybody else and tap into what it is they really want. And it's so hard for any of us. It's really hard to get out of the stories that we've been living in our whole lives. So for a three, sometimes what can happen is they can be so status oriented, or and it depends on the subtype, and we'll talk about that in other videos, but different threes do this a little differently. But basically, it can be hard for a three to stop climbing the ladder of success, and to just be who they are. So like, for instance, a three might spend his whole life trying to be a CEO of a company, when deep in his heart, he just wants to be a forest ranger. But forest ranger doesn't seem successful to his parents, or at least he doesn't think it does. So he's going to basically sell his soul to an image that he believes will get him adoration that he craves. But in doing that, he is practicing self-deceit, because he's not being honest with himself about who he is and what he really wants. So that's what's happening at three space. And I do want to, maybe this is a good time to point out that for any of the 9 Enneagram types, for any of the personalities, we fall into these because we get confused about who we are as children of God. And these behaviors are not, though they can cause a lot of destruction and chaos in our lives and in our relationships and our families. And so sometimes people can be very frustrated with us. But at the end of the day, we're doing this because we have forgotten who we are. So when it comes to twos and threes, it might be easy to just accuse them of being fake or of masking, but I find it most helpful to remember that the reason we do these things is because we're trying to be loved. Or even worse, we forgot that we already are loved. So having grace for people, and even for ourselves when we find ourselves in these spaces, is helpful, because this is human behavior. Like, what I'm going over is human behavior patterns. So to some extent, we all know we definitely know what it is to be human. So if we're really honest and doing a lot of self-reflection, we can find a lot of these behaviors that I talk about in these videos, even within ourselves. And it's better for us to get the log out of our own eye than worry about a little splinter in somebody else's eye. So it's real easy when you hear these, how other types are, to maybe blame or think, oh, I think my cousin does that. Yeah, you know what? I think my boss does that. I think it might be helpful for a moment, but reel it back into yourself. Every time you do that, go, okay, but where do I do that? That's a better question. Rather than pointing fingers at where everybody else is doing that, it's kind of easier to just say, ooh, could I do that? I think I do that sometimes. The virtue at point 3, if the vice is deceit, the virtue is something like truth, being true to themselves, finding out what it is they really want rather than chasing the status that they get so easily distracted by. Because what can happen, I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase. It's something like you climb the ladder of success only to realize the ladder was against the wrong building. It's like they can live their whole lives and achieve all the things and win all the trophies and have all the awards. But if they did that because they sold their soul, or because they weren't actually in a relationship, they were in a relationship because of the status it brought them instead of because they were in love with that person, or they had a career that made them all the money and made them extremely wealthy but took them away from their kids, and that's really what they wanted to do. Or they became something because their dad wanted them to be that, but that's not really what they ever wanted to be. So those types of things can happen in 3 space. So the truth is knowing who God actually made you to be and living into that. And also, I will say, at their best, 3s, okay, like all types at their best, are amazing. So 3s are really motivational. They are really good at encouraging people, and they really are good at being their best versions of themselves. And we actually need humans to do that. Humans are visual creatures. We need a target. It's very helpful for us to see like a role model to fashion ourselves after. And 3s are really good at that. They might be like exercise coaches, or they might be motivational speakers or teachers, or they could be CEOs. And they're good at what they do. And they're really interested in fully developing, when they're healthy, fully developing who they truly are. And that really is a gift to the rest of us. That really is a divine reflection to maximize who God invites us to be. And then we move to type 4. And type 4 in the heart space is, again, like, let's start with what's happening with all of the heart types is they have a sadness because they subconsciously or not feel not quite lovable. And so they have like a need to do something that makes them lovable. When it comes to point 4, they are mostly concerned about being themselves. 4s want to be loved and cherished for who they authentically are. So, we talked about 2 and 3, who are more prone to shapeshift, to people please. That's not so much what's going on at 4. 4s are very sensitive, and again, your personality is based on what you're focusing on. What they notice is, first of all, they notice that they have flaws. 4s are almost the hardest number on themselves, really. They feel like they have a fatal flaw, or maybe maybe back in their past, they used to have something going for them, but they've lost it. 4s are usually very creative-minded people. So when we think about 4 space, there's a lot of like ambiguity or mystery. There's a lot of creative expression, maybe even like mysticism type things. But 4s will report that they're missing something, but that something is sort of unnameable. And Fours are more tuned into the darker emotions or the harder to feel emotions than any other type of Enneagram number. So a lot of us are not comfortable with grief, sadness, failure, brokenness in the world, rejection. Um, Fours are aware that those hard emotions exist, and they are really more comfortable with that than the rest of us. One of the kind of think like Edgar Allan Poe, think emo, think fours are really deeply feeling their emotions, and they're trying to be authentic to the emotions that they're feeling. So it's not really, depending on the type of four, it's not going to feel appropriate for them to show up bubbly and happy and smiley if they're feeling profound sadness. They are trying to show up as they actually are. And I know I keep saying the word authentic, but that's because that's a really big word at point four. They want to be who they really are, and they want to be loved for that instead of for conforming to the ways of the world. So fours somehow believe that they usually do believe they're tragically flawed, but they also believe that they are very unique. They are somehow different from all the other types of people. And part of the story that they live into is they don't quite know what makes them different, but they have the sense that other people are living more fully or happier or more successfully. The four kind of has the feeling that they didn't get the memo. Like somehow everybody else is doing it correctly or got the memo, but the four didn't, or that the four used to have it and then they've lost it. It's a tragedy. Tragedy is common in four space, and sometimes so is being a victim. Fours see themselves a lot as victims of fate, and so that darkness can really grip them hard. And people who the other types who don't experience emotions as deeply and as regularly as a four don't necessarily know what to do with it, right? Like people are like, man, why are you bummed out all the time? But what's happening is they really are experiencing hard emotions more than the rest of us. They are higher in the trait of, it's called neuroticism, but it's the ability to feel negative emotions. Fours feel a lot of negative emotions. That's part of what characterizes four space. Now, because of that, part of their gift is they are so good at holding space for you when you have a tragedy or when you're going through grief or when you've lost a loved one. A four is very empathetic and very compassionate. And part of that is because they feel like they experience lots of suffering. So when other people suffer, remember your personality is formed on what you're focusing on. They focus on mostly their own suffering, but if other people are suffering, they're very empathetic and sensitive to that. And that's really a gift. When you've lost something, when you're going through a divorce or when you're going through a sickness or when you've lost a loved one, or a four is the one who will just come and sit with you. And that's actually really necessary and really healing. So fours also tend to be artistic and creative. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're artists, but they are creative thinkers. They are open-minded. They tend to also be high in a trait called openness, which means they are, I mentioned this before, but they're kind of into mystery and the beyond, right? What's not, we can't see. Meaning, what's the meaning of life? What's the kind of existential things that kind of all swirls around in four space. And their vice is envy. Envy because of what I mentioned, it somehow feels to them like other people have a better life than they do. And that can really make them burn with envy. The virtue at point four is something like equanimity, like reminding themselves, or gratitude. And sometimes I think gratitude might be an easier word. It's reminding them that actually, though they are victims, like that's true, but what sometimes they can't see is that we're all victims. Everybody is a victim. You literally cannot get through the human experience without being a victim. So it's not that it's not valid that they feel all this pain, and that they feel like they're a victim and they feel like they're, flawed. But what they can't see is that we're all flawed, and we're all victims of something, but of multiple things, probably. And their circumstance, though they're not wrong for noticing that it's very difficult, what they can miss is they can sometimes get so self-absorbed in their own experience that they don't recognize other people are suffering too. And remember this whole thing about not being lovable. Sometimes they think it's their suffering that's going to make them lovable. That if other people see their suffering, the other people will come and rescue them and finally love them. But like the other heart types, the real story is they're already lovable. They're already a child of God. They're not missing anything. They're not fatally flawed. We all have flaws, and thank God none of them are fatal. Everything can be redeemed. There is gratitude, right? This is why gratitude is their virtue. To remember that in every moment, there is so much to be grateful for, no matter what. No matter what, no matter what. Now, that's hard for fours to see because, again, their whole lives, that's not what they've been focusing on. What they've been focusing on is what they're missing. Their suffering, their victimization for what they do not have. So that's why the way out of that, the virtue of gratitude, lets them focus on, okay, well, what do I have? And that's part of growth for type 4. Okay, so I think that's all I really want to say about heart types, except for that this whole idea of emotions, right? Emotions are real. Emotions give us real information. And the heart types in some ways are more dialed into their emotions than the rest of us are. And it's their intelligence. It's how they navigate the world. They're navigating the world by reading their and other people's emotions. But in a way, they're struggling with their own emotions because 2s and 3s, like 2s only want to accept their positive emotions, but not pay attention to their negative ones. 3s are on a mission to be successful. And so how it's worded is usually they put their emotions to the side to deal with them later. But then they never get a chance to get back to them because they're busy chasing success. And then 4s over-identify with their emotions and forget that you are not your emotions. You are a human being who has emotions. So in other words, instead of saying, I am sad, I have sadness in this moment, right? It's separating who you are from the way your heart feels. Not that it's not valid that your heart feels that way, but you do not have to become your shame. You don't have to become your sadness. You can be liberated through that by recognizing emotions bring us information. And it's good information. And also emotion is how we connect with one another, heart to heart. But overusing emotions or misusing emotions, which is what happens in the heart types, is just as bad as not paying attention to emotions. So, and I think I mentioned that with the head types yesterday. They can overthink, and thinking is good. We celebrate thinking, but if thinking gets misdirected because you're trying to solve a problem of not being secure or safe in the world, then you take a wrong turn because ultimately we are secure and safe in the world. Your emotions for heart type people, it might feel like you have to be somebody who you're not in order to be lovable, but that's not a true story. You're actually fundamentally loved as is right now. And I think that's it. So everybody, emotional type or not, can rest in knowing you are beloved, you are a child of God, and I'll catch you at the next video. Thanks for watching.